My name is Kane Hawking, and ever since I was a child, video games have been a massive part of my life, with some of my earliest memories being of me with a controller of some kind in my hand. Now as an adult, I still love games as much as I did then, and even began reviewing them 2 years ago. One thing has always been on my mind though: how can I truly judge something without having tried to experience its creation myself? That's what this series aims to put to the test. So join me as I have my biggest challenge as a gamer yet, where I take to the world of developing a game for the very first time. This is my journey from critic to creator. Hello and welcome to another episode of Critic to Creator, the series where I, an aspiring games journalist, discuss game design and put myself through the very basics of creating my own game. Last episode we began our journey by discussing brainstorming and planning in our video games. If you haven't seen that episode yet, I highly recommend you do by clicking the eye that's just appeared in that top right hand corner over there. It'll take you directly there. This episode we're looking at the art of storytelling. An essential part in video games, storytelling doesn't necessarily need to be in-depth and complex to make a compelling experience in some of our favourite games. A story can be as simple as Save the Princess, or as nuanced as a 19th century Russian character drama, but it's all about finding that balance and creating the story to the game that you want to make, and vice versa. Even when stories aren't obvious or shown as important in video games, there's usually something that you can grab onto. That's the beauty of video games as an interactive medium. Aside from the story given to you by the developers, a lot of players can craft their own stories within the games. Little adventures or tales of hilarity, skill or tragedy. It's this aspect that other mediums lack, which makes video games feel so special. You can engage in the worlds created in your own way, and aren't limited to the story you're being told to follow. Even in games where you aren't given the freedom of an open world or a sandbox to run around in, these little stories can still be a vital part to your experience. Some of my fondest memories come from me playing Halo with my friends, creating our war stories within a war story essentially, and those are memories that I wouldn't really trade for anything. Those experiences I know are going to last with me a long time. They're some of my fondest gaming memories, and that's all well and good, but how do you go from creating a story for you and your friends to creating a story that everyone is going to want to experience? Being able to craft a story in an already constructed world is pretty damn easy. I mean, we do it every single day without realizing it. Think about every time you've gone to the shop and picked up some milk, and on the way there or on the way back or even in the shop, you've seen someone do something rather stupid or funny. Or think about every time you've gotten into an argument on social media or an argument with one of your friends. That's us using our environment around us to create stories that we can then tell to other people. Doing so in a video game is just an extension of that process. Creating our own world and then crafting stuff within that world though, that's a bit more difficult. Or is it? In John Yorke's bestseller Into the Woods, a 5-act journey into storytelling, Yorke tells of one of his friend's children writing a story without consulting anyone. This is what the child wrote. A family are looking forward to going on a holiday. Mum has to sacrifice the holiday in order to pay the rent. Kids find a map buried in the garden to treasure hidden in the woods and decide to go after it. They get in loads of trouble and are chased before they finally find it and go on an even better holiday. That child's depressing understanding of life and rent aside, how does a child, when writing spontaneously, harken back to tropes, story beats, and even structure that stretches back across generations naturally? How do we, as human beings, continue plucking out ideas and fundamentals when crafting and telling our own stories? The way Yorke describes it is that storytelling has a shape that dominates the way that all storytelling is told. We subconsciously use the same routines as storytelling, crafting arcs, be it in 3 or 5 parts, or using similar journeys or story structures to keep the listener, the reader, the viewer, or in video games, the player enthralled. If storytelling does have a shape though, what shape is it? Well, that's where we get into narrative structure. Breaking down how stories are built and how characters are made, there are actually 3 commonly used story structures when it comes to mainstream media. Those are the 3-part structure, which stretches all the way back to Aristotle, the hero's journey, commonly attributed to John Campbell, and Dan Harmon's story circle. The 3 common narrative structures are ones that are found all across media. While the way they're implemented doesn't always directly apply to video games, there are a lot of variables to take into account due to its interactivity, as well as the style of game, you can apply these narrative structures to the plot you want to fabricate and implement into your product. 3-part structure. The 3-part structure is your fundamental for storytelling, the bread and butter. In the three-part structure, stories are funnily enough composed of three major acts. The three acts go as follows: Act 1, the setup, Act 2, the confrontation, and Act 3, the resolution. Each act consists of three parts themselves, which helps keep the narrative through line. Act 1 consists of the exposition, the character's normal life and who they are, the incident, a disruption to their life thrown into the unknown, and plot point 1, the reason for your character to accept their quest. This can also be part of the incident. Act 2 consists of rising action, the journey is clear, side characters are fleshed out and hurdles are met for the protagonist to adapt to. The midpoint, the goal is threatened and the protagonist is at rock bottom, and then plot point 2, the pep talk, the overcoming of fears and new motivation. Pre-climax, the protagonist and antagonist clash, both prepared and the antagonist is winning. The protagonist is usually caught off guard and struck down. Then the climax, the protagonist grits their teeth, gets back up and finishes the job. Then the denouement, the return to normality, the protagonist wraps up their journey, returning home having changed from their experience. Campbell's and Vogler's hero journey. The similarities between Campbell's hero's journey and Vogler's, and also by extension Harmon's, are quite high, essentially being the same in the case of Campbell and Vogler, with Harmon refining it from the standard 11 or 12 steps to just 8. There's a lot here, so we're going to be a bit briefer with this one, but we'll link to all these structures in the description if you wish to read more. The 11 to 12 steps of the hero's journey are as follows. Step 1, the ordinary world, the sense of normality. Step 2, the call to adventure, the incident. Step 3, refusal to the call, plot point 1. Step 4, meeting the mentor, someone to help the hero on their quest. Step 5, crossing the first threshold, fully committed to the task, no going back now. Step 6, tests, allies, enemies. The hero, unfamiliar with this new world, finds people to help them along the way. Step 7, approaching the inmost cave. Not a physical cave, though it can actually be a physical cave. This refers to the approach of the goals of the journey, and can even be the protagonist's own fears. Step 8, the ordeal. The hero hits rock bottom, they face their fear, this experience will drive them going forward. Step 9, reward or seizing the sword. The hero's recovery from rock bottom, gaining the tool or knowledge that has ramifications for the story. Step 10, the roadblock. Having the reward, the hero tries to return to the ordinary world, but it isn't that easy and one more obstacle lies in their way. Step 11, the resurrection. The true climax, the crowning test for the hero for them to overcome. Step 12, returning with the elixir. This is for Campbell only, the return to normality having changed. Vogler's methods tend to skip over this final step, having the grand crescendo end the story, other than the quiet after the storm. Dan Harmon of Rick and Morty and Community fame trimmed this down to 8 steps, focused on character. These being Step 1, the character is in a zone of comfort, their sense of normality. Step 2, they want something, the incident or call to adventure. Step 3, they enter an unfamiliar situation, raising action. Step 4, adapt to it, the ordeal or overcoming it. Step 5, they get what they wanted, seizing the sword. Step 6, pay a price for it, suffer the consequences for their actions. Step 7, return to their familiar situation, back in their comfort zone. And Step 8, having changed, the journey and consequences of which having resonated with the protagonist. While these methods of storytelling can be difficult to adapt directly to a video game due to the interactivity of the medium, they are the basic structures and fundamentals to help you craft your idea. With this, you can weave your story effectively before implementing it, and working it into your game as you see fit, be it the linear story that the player must follow, one of many outcomes in a branching path, a beginning and ending with multiple options in between, or a main story that can be tackled at your own pace. These story structures will go a long way in crafting your tale. Enough from me though, what do our developers have to say?
The story in our game is told through mostly dialogue. We have some animation in there as well, but it's whatever we can get in there visually. That was partly due to time restraints, partly due to how we set it up and what we had.
We like to think, look, all our games are story, are narrative based, but we know that a lot will maybe don't necessarily the time. So we do a lot of we sort of dot things about that sort of story, so you can discover it if you want to. You don't necessarily have to. A lot of people just speed through it, but it's story first. But I guess story adjacent. Maybe you don't need to necessarily do it, and it's sort of like just ambiguous bits to it.
Being a party game, we obviously want it to be as pick up and play as possible. So with a story, we didn't want the player to invest too much time. We have a loose story based around each character, so we've got 4 regions in our game. So we've got a desert region where Pedro, the desert wrestler, comes from, and then Chomster, who's a big gorilla brute character, he comes from the jungle area, and then Maria, who's like a street busker, she comes from the city, the Mexico City area, and Lele, who's our Hawaiian little girl female character, she's from the islands. So we base it all around a story narrative on the regions without having to essentially tell the story.
Storytelling came in fairly late in the process, really. It wasn't a thing we were going to do initially. As the project expanded, we realised, well, this is getting bigger, we need a story to tie them together. So that's what we did. We built a story based around the 8 characters. Each of them have a separate story that could intertwine depending on which characters are in the game. And we just built the assets as we needed them. Rather than having cutscenes that are in a different style, it's all in-game, in-engine, pixel art. So it doesn't cut away from the experience.
A very interesting episode. Storytelling is actually something which I believe is coming stronger and stronger when it comes to video games. Developers are really beginning to craft games that tell memorable stories comparable to that of movies or TV shows. An impressive change from the more gameplay-orientated days of video games. This well-balanced between well-crafted game and well-crafted story is very exciting to me. When researching this episode, I actually came across a lot of ideas that I had lying around that could potentially become very exciting stories that I'd want to use for something. So who knows? Maybe one of these stories could be coming to a screen near you. Next episode, we start the production side of our video game journey by looking into all things graphics. We have our idea, we've crafted our masterpiece story, but how do we go about actually physically making our game? Tune in next time to find out. Until then though, I've been Kane Hawking, and we'll see you soon.